My family has a lot of stuff. Started when Suzanne and I got married 15 years ago, and all of my stuff and all of her stuff came to live together in a not very big dwelling in Fishers, Indiana. Oh, the boxes of stuff. Boxes everywhere. And then add to that 15 years of raising children and buying clothes and toys and household goods and accumulating all those papers and knickknacks and random things. Well, lately, we have been feeling the weight of all of that stuff. Literally. When we moved into our home across from the church here a few years back, all of that stuff had to be lugged physically from one place to the other, and oh my God, so much stuff. I wish I could say we had carefully sorted and culled and redistributed all of our things as part of the move, right, like you do. But we both worked full-time. I was in seminary and full-time at that time, and it was all we could do just to get it moved. So now I'm out of seminary and through the ordination process, and we thought, let's finally get a handle on all of this stuff that we never dealt with, which is how I came to discover that we own a blender. We were going through some bins and boxes from the garage, loosely categorized as kitchen miscellany, and I began to uncover pieces of this blender, which had somehow been spread out through 3 or 4 bins, and that I had forgotten we ever even owned. So it's well, here's the blender top, and then going through another bin, hey, here's the blender base. Imagine my growing excitement as I unearthed the pieces which, when assembled, would eventually equal one complete blender. It was like watching Voltron come together, only instead of robot lions, it was a blender. It's a deep-cut cartoon reference for the Gen Xers out there. Anyway, I was delighted. Hey, look, we have a blender, holding it up to the light. It was like Christmas, or I'd just done a magic trick. But having discovered and recovered the blender, I then had to wash the blender, which is always a pain because you have to get in around all the little sharp blade at the bottom, which is one of the reasons I am highly demotivated to ever actually use the blender to begin with. Then I had to make a space for the blender to live in the kitchen cabinets that we share with Suzanne's parents, and that meant a lot of shuffling around and creative rearranging of other dishes. So much banging and clanging later, the blender now sits in the back corner of a cabinet in our kitchen. Pretty much exactly the same as when it lived in a box in the garage, actually, only now I know I have it, and I know where it is, and now it's a little bit always in my way. So our sermon today is about stuff, all the stuff in our lives, and more specifically in our homes. Our relationship to the stuff of the world is an important relationship, with implications for our physical and emotional and spiritual well-being. So, of course, it is addressed in the world's various spiritual traditions. In the Gospels, for example, Jesus advises us over many different parables not to seek security by heaping up goods. Our earthly possessions, he says, naturally rust and rot. They may be lost or stolen. They have to be stored somewhere. And once stored, they become objects of jealousy and anxiety and worry. Buddhist traditions likewise counsel us against attachment to things, which is a major source of our experience of unease or suffering as people. In one of the Buddha's 5 remembrances that all people should regularly return to, we are reminded that all things change and that in the end, we cannot avoid being separated from our belongings. Remember this, says the Buddha. You cannot avoid being separated from all things. Or as the saying goes, you can't take it with you. Thich Nhat Hanh, the great teacher, in reflecting on the transience of things, concludes that my actions are my only true belongings. My actions are the ground on which I stand. Now, it is not that there is no joy or value to be had in material things. Far from it. The whole point of Thich Nhat Hanh's mindfulness practice is to be present to those things, to delight in the experience of the world by attending to it. Right? The real miracle is to walk on earth. Jesus lifts up the natural beauty of the lilies in the field and says that God intends just so much material beauty in our lives. Jesus' point is not that stuff is intrinsically bad. It is that if what we seek in our material possessions is beauty and joy and security, that we will not find these things in the stuff itself. Beauty and joy and security are spiritual qualities. We attain them through being in right relationship with the world and with our fellow beings and with ourselves. We attain these things through love and wisdom and relationship. Now, of course, there are also basic things that we do need to have to be secure and that many people do not have, right? So please don't misunderstand the intent of this sermon or of these various ancient teachings. Telling people not to seek safety in possessions when they lack medical care or stable housing or a neighborhood with clean air and free of environmental toxins, that's cruel and false. There is safety in these things. And arguably, in a society with such glaring disparities of wealth as America, our collective attachment to things is in fact an obstacle to creating a fairer society where fewer people are without the things that they need. But that is just a different sermon. This sermon has a more modest goal of looking at our individual relationship to stuff, starting in our own households. And many of our households, regardless of our socioeconomic status, have a lot of stuff. And having a lot of stuff is not necessarily good for us. It does not necessarily increase our well-being or make us feel more safe and secure. Quite the opposite. Beyond, again, that meeting of our basic needs, the accumulation of things can increase our anxiety, can alienate us from our experience of the world, can drain away our resources. It takes time and money and energy to care for our stuff, and can be physically bad for our health, right? Too many things attract dust, clutter our space, stress us out, distract us from our real concerns, become tripping and fall hazards even, and attract thieves. There's also a mental load just of having to manage a lot of stuff. All of our possessions take up room, not just in our dwellings, but inside our head. So what if we freed up some of that headspace for other things? Could we be less stressed, enjoy life more? Could we surround ourselves with less stuff and more beauty? Erica Lane, author of the book The Minimalist Way, Minimalism Strategies to Declutter Your Life and Make Room for Joy, points out in an online article called 9 Hard Truths About Clutter that everything you own, you have to take care of. Everything you own, you have to take care of. Our possessions have to be stored, maintained, cleaned, moved from place to place. This takes up your finite physical and mental and emotional and financial resources. Our time, she says, is so precious. Who wants to spend it cycling mountains of laundry from washer to dryer, replacing dead batteries, shuttling items from room to room? The argument for a minimalist lifestyle is that if we can begin to free ourselves from all the things we don't really use and don't really need and don't really love, there's less stress and more spaciousness in our lives, more spaciousness. We can really appreciate the things that we do have more, and we have more time for things that really make our lives richer. And we are literally richer because we've saved money not acquiring and storing and maintaining all that stuff. And we can use those savings to fund things we care about. Or we can pass those savings on to people and causes that we care about, decluttering ourselves of the things that we have and acquiring less to begin with can become the ground of a more expansive generosity practice. So acquiring less to begin with is one of the keys to making decluttering a transformative practice. Something that can change our lives as opposed to just being like a one-time expenditure of time and energy. I know from my own experience, right, that the closets I clean out seem to quickly fill back up, almost as fast as I empty them. Every drawer has a tendency to become a junk drawer over time. Every surface seems to want to get covered with a pile of something. Never start a decluttering journey without giving real thought to your consumption habits, advises Erica Lane. Otherwise, you'll find yourself right back in the same spot, overcluttered and weighed down. Set a goal not only to get rid of more, but to buy less. Some people use a strategy of living by this rule. When you buy or bring a new thing into your home, when you acquire a new possession, then you have to give away or recycle something that you already have. When you bring in something new, you release something old. This keeps the stuff from piling up inside of our homes to begin with, but also it spurs one to be more mindful of purchases, right? Like, do I want or need this new thing enough to acquire it, knowing that I'm going to have to release something else? Other people use a strategy of shopping sabbaticals or shopping holidays, and the idea is to see how long can you actually go without buying something new. Now, this probably isn't going to include like food or gas unless you live on a farm or have really good access to public transportation, and it definitely doesn't apply to medicine. But for other stuff, how long can you go without buying? Start small. Try to go a day without buying anything. That's probably easy. Try 3 days. What about a week or 2 weeks? Could you go a month without buying anything new? It could be an interesting and informative experiment. You could make a fun family game out of it and get the kids involved. What strategies would you use? Would you share, swap, borrow? There are apps and online communities now that are dedicated to creating local gift and sharing economies, so people can precisely pass around and pass on the things that they have, so other people need to buy less. If we're sharing or giving away, or at least taking a good to a thrift store, then someone else doesn't have to buy a new thing. And then there's less stuff being produced. So decluttering, acquiring less, sharing more, these are strategies for a more sustainable economy that produces less stuff overall. And the amount of stuff we produce in America anyway, in order for us to have all the things we have, is a real problem for the earth. It's just not sustainable. A few years back, we invited some Butler students to UUI to do on-the-spot sustainability assessments of our individual lifestyles. And as I recall, they assessed that if everyone were to live on Earth like I personally do, we would need at least 4 Earths to sustain that lifestyle. It may have been 6 Earths. Whatever the number was, it was sobering. And all those possessions have to be recycled, or they end up in a landfill. And all those possessions take resources to produce. If we're acquiring and using and consuming less stuff, we would have a lighter footprint on the earth. Sabrina Helm, Associate Professor of Family and Consumer Sciences at the University of Arizona, says decluttering and buying less can be the beginning of a more environmentally sustainable lifestyle. She says, in order to tackle overconsumption, which is a main driver of climate change, we need to consume less overall, which means cutting down on buying new things and services. And she concludes, if that were the persistent outcome of this minimalist trend, there would indeed be much to celebrate. So for this reason, the UUI Green Team has made decluttering its recommended earth-friendly practice for the month of January. Every month this year, they're going to have a recommended earth-friendly practice for you to consider, and in January, it is decluttering. And a lot of people take the start of the new year as a time to go through their things and get rid of stuff anyway, right? Ring out the old, ring in the new. But it can also be quite a project. So how to get started? Because decluttering can feel overwhelming, right? Sometimes if we have a ton of stuff, we don't know where to begin. So we get bogged down before we can even start. So start small. Pick a small space to begin and go item by item in that space, deciding what to keep and what to give away, recycle, or discard. And my advice is there can be a surprising amount of emotion attached to our things, right? These are not just things. We have relationships with them. We have emotions about them. So, stop and recenter yourself with a few cleansing breaths if this process is making you tense or anxious. And partnered people may find that they sometimes disagree on the disposition of things, on what is valuable and what is not valuable, and what starts as a fun exercise can quickly turn on you. So pay attention to the energy in the room if you were doing this as a fun couple exercise, and pause and recenter if it seems to be sparking bad feelings or conflict. Music is a good thing. How to decide what stays and what goes. Well, Marie Kondo famously invited us as a nation to lay out all of our things and then gently and tenderly hold each of our possessions, give it our mindful attention, and if it does not spark joy, to thank it for its service and release it. I love this idea. And I am also slightly exhausted by this idea when I think of applying it to the mountains of boxes in my garage. But I can see selectively applying this to more intimate things like clothes or papers or mementos. But if the Kondo method seems too time-consuming or emotionally intensive or just too touchy-feely for you, here's another quick and easy method for decluttering that I actually found on the website for the Vietnam Vets of America for some reason. I think they have a decluttering service that they offer. And their advice is not to overthink it. Keep things if you've used them in the last 3 months or if they're heirlooms and keepsakes. Otherwise, if they're not special and you haven't used it in the last 3 months, donate, recycle, discard. Seasonal items would be the obvious exception. So the 3-month rule now is making me rethink that blender. Honestly, the last time I used the blender was when I made smoothies for the kids in the morning before they went off to high school, and they are full-on grown-ups now. I haven't used a blender in 5 years. Why am I excited about this thing? I guess I have a sense that a person just ought to own a blender, or that on some hypothetical future day, I will be very glad that I do have a blender, like there's going to be a margarita emergency or something. But in truth, my blenderless existence has been to date 100% satisfactory. So maybe the thing does need to go to Goodwill after all. Or, let me know if you need a blender. We're sending a lot of stuff to Goodwill. One of the things that makes it easier for us to declutter is the idea that something that we have that we barely take notice of, that has been sitting in a box or a closet for a year, could be a blessing to someone else. Could be playing a useful role or bringing joy to someone else. That is very motivating personally for us in letting go of things. But it's not a perfect solution to a global problem. A lot of items donated to Goodwill end up being shipped to other countries or dumped in landfills because the reality is we just make a lot of stuff year after year in America with the expectation that much of that stuff will be discarded after used briefly. The long-term environmental benefits of decluttering really only manifest when we collectively change our relationship and expectations about how we use stuff and how much stuff we use. Thich Nhat Hanh wrote, "The only sustainable way for human life to continue is if we consume less and become content with fewer possessions. Once we are able to live simply and happily," he said, "we're better able to help others. We have more time and energy to share. Mindful consumption," he said, "is the way out of craving, not only for us as individuals, but also for the whole world." As we reconsider our relationship to the stuff in our life, may we mindfully free up space by letting go of more and taking in less, with the goal of releasing stress and anxiety, with making room for joy and generosity, and of lightening our load on the earth that sustains us. May it be so, and amen.